Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. Today, we welcome sound designers, supervising sound editors, and re-recording mixers Andy Hay and John Warrin. The duo join us to talk about their work on Anora. Andy and John will break down the use of sound in the film and how it can be used in pivotal and emotional moments. Please be warned that there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Andy and John. Hi, Andy and John. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks
Thanks
for
very much,
having us.
Robert.
I'm excited to sit down and talk to you guys about Anora, which came out last year. I know we're talking about it in 2025, but as award season goes on, it picks up a lot of buzz. How have you found the reception to the film itself? You see a lot of positive things online, as I mentioned as well, awards buzz or even winning awards as well. But as people who have worked on the film, how does it feel for you guys?
I think it's been amazing. We've been fans of Sean's for such a long time, and he's done such amazing films, and it's incredible to see such a wider market really being introduced to Sean, and not just Sean, uh, to this style of filmmaking, art house films, neon. It's just been really exciting for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Just as John said, I mean, I've always thought of Sean as a bit more of a niche filmmaker with a core audience that is very loyal. But it seems like he's crossed over a bit more into the mainstream with this one, which is, I think, unexpected, but obviously incredibly welcomed. So it's been really fun for us to just sit back and see that happen and get so many wonderful responses to the film.
I think as well, when you're working on something, you never know. You can tell if, I don't think you know how it's going to connect with audiences, but obviously if you're working on it as well, you can tell if something's good or not. And I guess when there's certain filmmakers as well, and when you're working with it so closely as well, especially with sound, where sound plays such a big part in films, and even in this film as well, which I'm really sort of excited to dive into. I think you can kind of see if something's sort of exciting, and then having people sort of connect to it more and are enjoying it and having a lot of talk about it online probably just amps it up by 10 as well, knowing that people are receiving it so well.
Absolutely. And, Florida Project was Andy's first film with Sean, and then I joined on with Red Rocket. And we were super excited about Red Rocket as well, but the reception to this worldwide has been amplified from Red Rocket, which was an awesome film as well, and Florida Project as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, precisely. And I think like when I finish each one, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite Sean Baker film, and I say that after every one, and
Yeah,
the same is true with this one. But yeah, it's really been remarkable just to see the way it's picked up, and I think Neon gave them a pretty wide theatrical window, and Sean's films are theatrical movies. I mean, they're made for the cinema, they're shot in film, and they're made to be exhibited and received in the cinematic format. And so it's been really incredible that Neon was able to carve out. I think they got a 60-day theatrical window prior to it hitting any sort of streaming or online VOD kind of thing. So, that alone is like an incredible feat, considering the fact that not a ton of people are going to the cinema anymore. So the fact that it's done so well while being in its largely theatrical run is also just a testament to the quality of the film. And it's just been this word of mouth, sort of organic growth as the thing has just sort of spread all over the world. It's really really remarkable. So we're super happy for Sean and for Alex and Sam, the whole team.
I think that's another crazy thing, like getting the 60-day, because unless you're one of the sort of big blockbuster superhero films, is quite unheard of at the moment. And when you see that, it's kind of like you still feel like there's a little bit of hope that people are still sort of going to the cinema and going to watch it and are interested in these kind of films. And I think these sort of films are always going to be important in our zeitgeist and for like future generations because these are the films that will inspire people to go out and pick up a camera and be like, wow, like if somebody could make a story like this, a really human story, maybe I can do it as well. And there's so much to unpack with it as well as a human side as well, because I feel like sometimes in the era of streaming, we do miss these films and like the importance of them as well.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. I mean, these are exactly my kind of films. These are the films that I seek out, the films that I enjoy. I spend more time on Mubi than I do on Netflix or Max or whatever, you know. And as you said, it's important that these kind of films have a life and have a voice. So, you know, and every part of the chain is integral to that, you know, having Neon come on board, having financiers come on board that still believe in this type of filmmaking, see its importance and its relevance is really, it's really, you know, heartwarming to see this still happening, you know, because you know, there was a period of time when I think it seemed like we were just going to be making blockbuster temples, you know, forever, and that the art house thing was dying out. But we've seen this really lovely resurgence of that. So yeah, it's super important. Really glad that you know, everybody that's involved in the art house movement and in the independent movement is still at it. You know, the passionate people that see the importance of this kind of work as well. So you know, it's great that it's still happening.
Just to go to the beginning, how did the project come about? Because you guys have worked with Sean in the past. Was it a case of just getting a text saying, "Look, I've got another one, you know, let's get to work."
Yeah, pretty
We
much.
were, yeah,
Go on,
we were contacted, early on. Sean, as they're getting started, we knew quite a while, I think about a year ahead that this was going to be coming. So we were prepared. And Sean works in a very interesting way. He edits linearly, so he does not do a rough cut and then go back and show it to people and go back and tweak and go back again. He really just kind of goes sequence by sequence and really makes the story happen, and that's kind of it. And he does a few tweaks after that. So we were prepared for that. And with this film, it was interesting because we actually got started before he even finished the film. He had an hour left to go. That there was no rough cut, there was nothing. He hadn't even started editing at all, I don't think, as far as I know. And so we had to get started as almost a 2.5 hour movie. So we got about maybe 50 minutes of it, or I mean, an hour and 20 minutes of it. And we're doing a spotting session where the rest of the film hasn't even been edited. So yeah, it was pretty interesting.
How does that work when you know that there's the stuff has not been complete? Do you guys sort of are you slightly on edge because you know that you don't want to be that sort of boulder chasing Sean to get his work done because then that adds pressure to him, but then also there's pressure for you guys to get going as well.
I think we knew pretty much once we got to the point where it was clear that you know we were in finishing mode, meaning that we had a deadline to hit, and that deadline was Cannes. Sean is very much a Cannes darling, so we sort of backed everything into that, right? So from onset, where like John was saying, where we had our first spotting session, we had I think 4 of the 8 reels. So you know we were a couple of months out, and we had that deadline set in the calendar coming up. So it's like, okay, everything we do between now and then is just ticking down to that eventual deadline. And so, yeah, the pressure mounts more the closer you get to that date, actually, because you know then it's like we got to cross every T and dot every I, you know, and you know I think you know in the early part of the process where we've got 4 of those 8 reels, it's like, this is great. We love it. This movie is going to be freaking fantastic. Like everything we're seeing on screen is beautiful. We're, you know, receiving those performances. It's just like, oh, this is going to be killer. And so we just kind of set to work, sound effects editing, dialogue editing, queuing the ADR and whatnot. And yeah, just waiting for reels to arrive. And yeah, as we get closer to that eventual delivery date, there's all those, you know, go backs and bits and pieces that haven't been quite finished yet that just get squeeze and squeeze and squeeze into those final, you know, days, hours, nights, you know. But having done Red Rocket together, which was a start to finish package for us, where we did the sound editorial and the mix, we understood Sean's workflow, and we built a trust and a language with him on that one. Where on this one, he basically turned over the material to us and said go, without a ton of oversight. He's with us every minute of the day for the most part, unless he's doing like a VFX or color review during the mix. And so he's with us. For the mix, yeah, for the mix. And so during that part, he's very much with us. He's engaged. He may be on his laptop doing other things, but he's in the room. And so anytime we have thoughts or ideas or stuff that we want to try together, that's very much a part of the process. But prior to that, during the editorial process, I think because of the success of our relationship working with him on Red Rocket, and obviously previously Florida Project, which I mixed solo for him, over time we just built up that trust. And so he turned this one over to us with very little in terms of sound direction, and sort of said, just make it great. And so that's what we did.
So literally no pressure, make it great. There you go to work.
But I'll also add that the time pressure is never from us. It's always Can is like the pressure. When is that due? And so
Yeah.
we have to work as fast as we can at the tail end to get it done for Can.
Yeah, like what is the last plane flight we can get this DCP on to get it to the exhibition on time?
That even working to that sort of deadline as well, thinking like when's the last plane that they can catch with this on? And it's like, okay, we have to do it by this sort of date. I'm guessing that kind of creates a lot of long days for you guys as well.
Certainly. This one we had more time, but Red Rocket for sure was, I think we had 7 dialogue editors or something just to get it done get the editorial done as promptly as possible, and that we had as much time as we needed for the mixes to happen. With this film, we did have a fair amount of time because, we got started and we were able to start, and he still had quite a bit to edit of the film. So it wasn't as crazy in the beginning, but, definitely during the mix, you'd always want some more time, but, you've got Can, so.
Because the mix is never finished. You just have to decide that you're done at some point. You can twiddle indefinitely.
Do you find as well, like when you have that much creative freedom, does that make your jobs easier, or do you find it a little bit more difficult knowing that you kind of have a blank canvas for your sound, but at the same time you don't have pointers, so you can kind of maybe go too far in one direction or not enough in another direction?
I think that we certainly had learned Sean's language. For me, I love to just understand, we could watch a director's past films, but once we learn the language, and have that first conversation, we know we're creating a Sean film, and as much as we express our creativity, at the end of the day, our job, I think, on any film should be to make a film that's cohesive for that director's vision. And so, having done the previous films with Sean, we understood that language and he trusted us in that. So from that, we're just, having fun creating a film that we know he'll appreciate.
Yeah, I think John's absolutely right. I think it probably sort of happens on maybe a little bit of a subconscious level by the time you get to doing your third film with someone, where you're not feeling around in the dark for the edges of the box that you're allowed to play in. You just sort of like maybe instinctively or intuitively know where those lie, and you can just sort of, I don't know. I mean, like, I think John can speak to this a little bit too. I mean, for me, like on these kind of films, most films that I tend to work on, most of my clients are repeat clients that have a history of work and spent many years with, and I'm lucky and blessed that a lot of the films I get to work on are films that I really like and I really enjoy. And once you get that sort of language and understanding of your filmmaker and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to say, which comes through from the script, and then obviously from then discussions and spotting sessions and so on. Oftentimes I feel like the film very much sort of like reveals itself to you, to us, in the editorial process and in the mixing process. It sort of like tells you what it wants in a way. Maybe you'll veer down an alley and be like, oh no, turn around, go back. But so much of it is really, it's just a feel thing, So I guess probably, as we've said before, it just comes down to like an understanding of your particular director's, language of film and cinema and what they're trying to present and what their particular language is. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember after playing the first reel, Sean turned to us and said, "Oh yeah, you guys know my stuff. You know what I want." So it was like we kind of understood it, and it was pretty seamless, as far as hitting what he wanted.
Yeah, which leads to a very enjoyable mix process. Because like I said earlier, like that's the time where we get to hang, and he's with us, and Sam and Alex are with us too, and it's playtime. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess also that gives you like a nice little brush your shoulder sort of moment of when they're like, yeah, you by giving that answer, being like, oh, you understood what we want to go for, and I guess having that shorthand, you know what people like and what they don't like, and I remember speaking with John about this as well as like how important sound is in film and how it can be seen as like it can really make or break a scene in a film because it could be it could be a scene could be played for dramatic, but then if you use the wrong sound, it could be people might interpret it as like comedic and in that sort of way as well. But I guess is when you're working with someone that you have worked previously as well, it's probably just easy knowing what they like. You know what they're gonna you know what they're gonna like, you know what they're not gonna like, and you know how to also sprinkle your own sort of touch to it as well.
Yeah, and I think one other thing to mention is, with Sean's films, it's a lot about realism, and especially in this film. And so, part of our direction is just making the film feel, having the audience dive in and feel like they're really there. So, like Andy said, the film reveals itself, things happen that we just want to create the world that Annie is experiencing. And so, we have direction from the actual environment.
Yeah,
Yes.
which is oftentimes, which is I was going to say, and often it seems like, at least in my experience, if you in the first, let's say 10, 15, maybe first reel, like if you get your audience to fully believe, what you're presenting to them as real and allows them to, go into that suspension of disbelief, then you can take them anywhere. Right, because you've got them in the palm of your hand, and they trust what they're seeing and hearing. So, I think then that informs us to really nail the first reel. Like that club, like what that feels like, what Annie's experience is in that club, what that experience is for her taking the train home after working all night, what that experience is for her, walking down the street to get to her apartment, what her apartment feels like. All of those moments really set the tone for her life experience. And so really nailing those then, allows us to maybe be a bit more explorative, down the line. But as John said, very much so, like the edict is that this is real. Like this, everything about this needs to be felt and presented as being real, and not like hyper real, not like over the top real, not sound designed for, like in a sort of flashy, whiz-bangy way, but like just dialed into to be utterly believable. Because then, I think it creates sort of like a sonic cradle for the rest of the picture to sit in and for those performances to shine through, right? I mean, sound is important in film, and for sure it's important in this film, but it's relatively speaking a small percentage of the overall pie that makes this film, right? And so again, just providing that base layer of realism such that everything else that's sitting on top of that has a place to sit and to be expressed as real and as accurately as possible, so that the audience members take it, at face value and go along for the ride.
You made an interesting point about sort of building up the world and, when you're in the club with Annie or even on her ride home, just because it is a contemporary film. And that us as audience members as well, we're kind of used to hearing certain things. So I guess if you take like the subway home, for example, I think I say we all, that's probably a massive generalization. So apologies for that sort of phrasing, but I think we kind of understand how a sort of train might sound and the sort of movement of it all, or sometimes we might skip off the tracks, for example. But as like a sound team, like how do you work towards how does that aspect work in films that you create the sound for and implement sound in? Because it's so normal for us to hear, but how do you go about making sure that it is normal for us and not something's not off with it?
What to me, the most important thing in filmmaking is to have experienced life and to have traveled the world and travel places and know what things sound like. And I lived in New York, so that helped a lot. And there's 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 a very much discussion. I think a lot of when we're working with Sean, there's a lot of discussion of like, oh, this is how that sounded in that room. So our tweaks are often like the Mercedes has to sound exactly like that Mercedes that his parents had when he was a kid or something. There's a lot of like emotional support when you nail a sound that somebody might be familiar with. And, that emotion just helps your film. If you can do that realism, and then on top of that, we have the sound design stuff that's our base layer. And then all the sound affecting people has to work within that world. So, we can't have, there's no spaceships in this movie. There's nothing like otherworldly. There's no sound design, score like sound design or anything like that. So we're basically working within this world. And then our sound design has to be things that people are like not even conscious of, but we're affecting them with the sound and the way we play with the realism of those different environments, whether it's the heightening of things or, tonal things that we can do to affect the emotion.
No, I was going to say, so there's like to your initial question, there's the what does a thing sound like, right? What does a particular thing sound like? Yeah, of course, we've all experienced life, and there's certain things and certain expectations, and there's tropes in filmmaking and so on that oftentimes we rely on. But sort of to John's point in terms of this is what this particular thing sounds like, but how we present it is what gives it emotional context. So, like I've said this before, I'll give this example where I live on the east side of LA, there's these Pasadena parrots that do a round trip around the neighborhood every day around 4 p.m. They just set off from Pasadena and they do this round trip around Mount Washington, up the Arroyo and back to Pasadena. And they're loud and they're noisy. And they're like, wah, wah, wah. And so on a good day when I'm out and the sun shines out and I've got all my work done and everything's gravy, it's like, oh, the parrots are out. They're lovely. They're beautiful. And it's, just really grounding and wonderful. And then if it's a shitty day where like, nothing's going right and I'm trying to log into a Zoom and I can't get on or whatever, and there's bloody parrots coming around and I'm shaking my fist at them. Damn parrots, right? So same sound, but different emotional context, right? Based on my state of mind. And so you can sort of reverse engineer that, if you will, in filmmaking, like how I want you to feel in this moment while using this sound that is the correct sound is all in the presentation of such sound, such that it has the emotional impact that we want it to have. So obviously, like louder is bigger, perhaps brighter is more grating to the ear. So there's different ways to present sounds that are familiar, such that they on a subconscious level, ideally, because we never want people to be aware of sound. We want it to remain this dark, invisible art that, its superpowers, its stealthiness, right? So it's in the presentation of those very familiar and obvious sounds that we're able to give emotional context. And a lot of that stuff comes into play in the mix. It comes into play, as we're zooming into the sort of micro level, a particular moment within a particular scene, but then also thinking about it contextually in the macro level. Okay, we've just spent 30 minutes doing this arc and these peaks and valleys, and we need to sort of chill for a bit and pull things back because we know we're going to go big again. So, you're always like thinking micro and then also zooming out a bit to go macro. So all that is to say, you're playing in this box of realism, but you have an incredible palette to work with and then tool set to manipulate those sounds such that you give the proper emotional context to any particular moment within the film.
When especially for like this sort of film, because there is a mixture of chaos and then also quieter moments where John mentioned about in the Mercedes scene and how needing that you need for like the engine to sound for that, for example, 1978 model of that car and how it's going to run and hum. But I think as well how you also mentioned about the birds and how on different days those birds could make you feel a different way, even though they sound the same. I think it's probably the same for when you go like the club scenes in the film, where at the beginning where it can be quite loud, and that's the environment that Anora's in, and it's kind of celebratory. But then as you get to them trying to find Ivan, and you go to the club, it's just a jarring, annoying sound. It's like, why is this place so loud?
Yeah, precisely. Exactly. I mean, that's sort of exhibit A of what we were just talking about, right? It's like, we know what noisy clubs sound like. And exactly to your point, just how much can you ratchet it up? Like how much of Taurus's and the barkeep's dialogue can we actually swallow with the music such that we understand the intention of the scene, which is basically like we don't necessarily need to hear what they're saying. We just need to understand that they're communicating with one another and need to understand that, like, nope, ain't here, keep looking, right? So exactly. I mean, I think you just highlighted exactly like one iteration of how that works.
I think as well that maybe sound like a bit of a grumpy old man being like, why is it so loud in here? But it's just an interesting way of like, I guess as a storytelling device that you don't need to have the characters say certain things. You just sort of understand what's going on through sound and the visuals as well, which makes me want to go back and watch the film again just to sort of pick those sort of things up. But then also when we're talking about those club scenes, whilst we're still on that, I read another interview and I can't remember which publication it is, so apologies. But you guys mentioned about when you're curating the sound and where sound comes from in those bigger spaces, that if you're in a club, you kind of have to think about where people are positioned and the sort of geography of it all, which I find really, really fascinating because that is something that just wouldn't have crossed my mind to think of how the sound is created and how it's presented to us as an audience. When it comes to those sort of scenes, and then you have the sound sort of travel in those sort of areas, how do you go about creating the sound design and then engineering it in so it doesn't sort of sounds like it's coming from a certain place out of somebody's speaker or a headphone?
So John, myself, and Sean, we at the beginning of the mix, we put together a little map of the club of HQ so that we could all understand its geography and make decisions together about what each room should sound like as that room relates to the main floor, which is the loudest floor or the loudest area. So there's rooms adjacent, there's rooms around the corner, there's rooms upstairs, there's rooms in the back, and so on. So we built that map, and then we understood that the main floor is going to be raucous. They're going to have a good sound system, subwoofers, the whole deal. And so we started with the main floor, got that dialed in to how we wanted it to sound in terms of how the music was presented, and then also how the crowds would feel in that space. Thankfully, and this doesn't always happen, but thankfully, our production mixer was very intent on reminding Sean and everybody on set that this is a big loud club and you guys have to project. So the actors, we got all that in the performances, right? They're very much projecting over one another and sort of almost yelling at each other as you would in a noisy nightclub. So that adds to the level of believability. And, in terms of the music presentation, just quickly go over that again. It's a stereo piece of music, much like, the track would exist on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. We don't get splits. We just get a stereo track. These are popular tracks. So, one way to do it would just be to take that 2-track, run it through a plugin that makes it what we call spatialized, so that it sort of unwraps it, so you have it presented in the Atmos environment where it hits multiple speakers, throw a bit of reverb on it, a bit of compression, some EQ, whatever, and call it a day. That works. What I chose to do was go a little bit further than that and think about what kind of speakers exist within each room, how many of them are there, and characteristically how they might differ, even within one of the rooms. Like maybe the one off to the side is, a bit beaten up and more bright or less bright than one of the others, or it's a bit more distorted or what have you. So there's more going on there where I just take the stereo music track and duplicate it multiple times and then have that be presented as, a number of speakers within the larger space, and all of them sort of like having their own sonic signature, if you will, and then balancing those relative to one another. And then as we move through space with the camera, then you're sort of dynamically shifting between those various speakers such that you feel some degree of movement within the space. Because the music is the loudest thing up against the dialogue, we start there, and then John works in the crowds, which are the larger crowds, and then I come back in with the loop group stuff, which is the sort of sprinkling of the foreground non-principal characters that you would hear, right? Such that you get a little flavor of like people that are closer to you. And so that would be the process. And then, like I said, once we've got the main floor established, then we would go next door or into the back or, into the kitchen or whatever. And like, okay, we're this far away from the main floor. It has its own speaker system, but we are still hearing the main floor spilling over. Like we're still hearing some of the low end coming through the walls or whatever, right? And the crowd and so on as well. So yeah, it's really fun to mix because it really allows you to really stretch out and try a bunch of stuff. And again, it's all in that spirit of creating realism, right? Like, as John was saying, like get out there and travel the world and experience the world will make you a better sound designer, sound mixer. Certainly no stranger to nightclubs, having played in bands and done a bit of DJing and whatever. So it's like, I kind of know what that shit sounds like. So, let's go for it. Let's make it feel as real and believable as possible.
And we had a lot of great production recording from Boris, our production mixer. He got a lot of great crowd sounds as well that we were able to, so crowd sounds from the actual club as well as other, things throughout the film. He did a great job of getting us a bunch of stuff that we could use. So it's not just cutting from library, things like that, and loop group, but also just fantastic production sound that we're able to lay in there on its own tracks.
How does that work with you guys in production of sound? Because they're sort of on set getting what they need to do. Do you guys communicate with one another, or is it sometimes they do stuff off their own back to make sure that, okay, when these guys in the edit, they might need these sounds instead of just using library sounds?
Yeah, that's what I meant. So I shouldn't say production sound, but
Depends on.
Sorry. Yeah, I was saying there are wild recordings that they did, separate from the production. So, Andy.
It depends in terms of like the relationship between production and post. It depends on the filmmakers and how early, we will be brought on. In some cases, I get brought on in pre-production and I'll give some input in terms of like personnel that I think might be the right fit for the shoot. because every film is unique and every film is different, and people have strengths and weaknesses and different territories and geographies and so on. And I have a short list of folks that I really love and admire their work. And so that might, depending on that, the nature of that relationship between the location sound recordist and post-production, we might be able to engage in some conversations about things that we might be thinking in the post world that we would love for them to get on the day, right? I did this movie one night in Miami that Regina King directed, which has some concert scenes with Sam Cooke. There's these flashbacks to Sam Cooke performing in various venues. And I worked with the, what do you call him? I guess he was the guy that produced those songs, right? So we like pre-record all that stuff, and then it gets played back on set, either via earwaves or on a speaker system, and people will either be lip syncing or singing along, depending on the nature. So anyway, long story short, that film, we did all this pre-production. We knew exactly what we wanted to get, and we had 1,000 extras in this room. And it was like, okay, all we got to get them to do is stomp their feet and clap their hands, because it's going to be a big part of this sequence of events in this particular scene. And of course, the day runs long and everything, the room's mic'd, it's all ready to go. They've got everything for the day. The day runs long by like 5 minutes or something. And so the AD is like, okay, cut, that's a wrap. And so everybody scrambles like rats, and I'm like, no, I want 3 minutes. I just stick around for 3 minutes and stop your feet and clap your hands. But they didn't, right? So they were gone. So I was like, oh shit. So, best laid plans and all that. But sometimes there's a dialogue, sometimes there isn't. Whenever there is, it can be very much fortuitous, because we can have that conversation about, hey, it'd be really great if you could grab this for us, or think about this, and so on and so forth. Our guy Boris on this one was incredible. Just like for the style of filmmaking that Sean employs, he's absolutely the best man for the job. I mean, the fact that he was able to capture tracks as well as he did is really kind of remarkable, because the shoot was very, very, very challenging. And he did a wonderful job. So we had beautiful recordings to bring to the mixing stage with us. And like John was saying, he had the foresight to get some nice wild recordings of Club Walla and stuff like that as well. So yeah, super helpful.
I think that's quite cool as well, knowing that, getting those recordings and helping you guys out. I guess that's also a sign of a good production sound mixer, when they're on set, getting those additional things and thinking on their feet and being like, oh, this would be useful, or this could be quite cool, and helping you guys out before you even realize it. And I guess that's also the whole point of filmmaking, is like the collaboration process, and how important it is, and how also somebody's sort of giving you a bit of a leg up before you start. What I'm also curious to know about, because you mentioned it earlier about Sean's approach in filmmaking, and in this film there are moments where I've read behind the scenes about how certain scenes were filmed, and how you basically went about and disrupted people's sort of days by shooting in restaurants and whatnot, and their reactions are genuine. When it comes to the edits and doing the sound for it, does this create a lot of difficulty, because there's sometimes might be confusion in what's happening in the scene, or do you sort of just use that to amplify the chaos of what's happening?
Certain scenes, especially like the scene in Tatiana's, which, there was an event happening when they shot, but not even that, even in the scenes with multiple actors, a lot of times we don't necessarily know. The edit is our guide, but we don't always know, like, oh, Sean actually wanted to hear this other person who's making this offhand comment in the background. Oh, that one's really important. And this is, so there's a lot of that going on, during the edit, and sort of there were scenes that we did an edit and sent to Sean, and he's like, gave a little feedback, and we're like, okay, we want to hear this, or we want to hear that. And I think a lot of that comes out in the mix as well.
Yeah, I think Tatiana's is a good one to talk about, because that's one of those scenes where, like you were saying, Robert, like, it's sort of like a stolen moment in time, right? It's an actual party that music was actually playing in there, and they just happened to walk in with their cameras and their actors and capture the moment and all of those reactions from real folks who are non-actors who, when they woke up and had their cornflakes that morning, had no idea that this was going to be part of their evening. So, you're getting, again, like, and as far as like how it works towards the realism edict of the film, it's like it doesn't get any more real than that. It presents a bit of an interesting challenge for us, although I say interesting because it depends on your point of view in terms of the kind of sound you are, the kind of sound person you are. If you're a traditionalist, you would, you might get the call that like, oh, this is how we shot this thing, and you'd be like, oh, well, fuck, we're gonna have to ADR everything, we have to replace all the music, and yada yada, because you can't possibly make that work, And then people like us are like, well, I don't know, let's see what we can do. Because you are, very much like going against the grain in terms of like, okay, well, we do want to hear these honest reactions, right? And we do want to hear the music as it feels and as it's presented in that club. But you know what? It was captured with a boom and a few laughs, so it's all mono. So it's not really that cinematic. So what can we do to make it cinematic? And so we get in there and we look at what we have, and there's bits and pieces that we cut together in the dialogue. I'll just call it production edit because it's more than dialogue. It's dialogue and it's music. There's dialogue there's music in the dialogue tracks, right? And so you cut it together as best you can so that you can use all of those usable bits. And that Sean's going to be like, that guy that cackled off screen, like, I love him. Or like, there was that siren that went roaring by right on top of that piece of dialogue. I love that, stuff like that. So you're like, okay, we've got to preserve all that. And then we've got to like make it cinematic, right? Because we've got to make it play in a giant theater filled with a couple of thousand people. So it's got to have more than just center channel mono information. It's got to be spread out. It's got to fill the room. And so, yeah, we're then like thinking about the music. Okay, well, can we find that bit of music? Can we actually like sync it up to the production? And can we take, with some tools, like, can we get the stuff that we don't need because it's going to obscure the dialogue? Can we get that out of the way, but can we retain the rest of it? And can we put that in the left rights and maybe spread it out a bit with some reverb into the sides as well? And can we get some loop groupers in, and can we get some crowd stuff that's going to feel authentic to those Russian folks that were there on the day, and that same dialect and that same age group, and you know what I mean, so that it all feels seamless. And so that's where it becomes like that interesting Rubik's Cube of like, how do we actually like take this stuff that, again, as a traditionalist, be like, this is unusable, and make it our friend and run with it, and then what can we do to enhance it to give it that cinematic feel? So it's I don't know, it's good, fun, challenging, and it's outside the box, but it's the kind of stuff we love.
And there were a couple of scenes, or a handful of scenes, where they're going into these clubs and sometimes they can't license the music that happens to be playing in there. So then we had the challenge of having to get rid of the music and not do ADR. So that created challenges, but like Andy said, it's a lot of fun.
With the sort of licensing as well, that's always like a great area. The licensing, though, if they will allow you to use their music in the film because they have no idea how we're going to use it. But then I guess if they create a lot of challenges in terms of how these scenes are shot, then it probably is quite a lot of fun because it's, even though somebody says, oh, maybe you can't do it this way, we can't do it that way, but then actually you guys are like, yeah, give it a go. We can still have a lot of fun. But then I can imagine as well also oh, I like the little bit of siren that we hear screeching off in the distance. And it's like, okay, somehow I need to pick that out and amplify it a little bit more and make sure that people can hear that coming.
Yeah, precisely. Not to get too technical and nerdy about it, but let's dig into that siren thing just for a quick minute, because that's one of those moments where, it was something that happened on the day that was one of those happy accidents that Sean was like, the gods are shining on us today, right? I mean, I think they shine on him every day, but it was one of those moments where it's like, that's excellent. Like, what just happened is perfect. We want to preserve that. That's going in the edit. That makes this moment sing. We love it. And so in Sean's world, where he's cutting it, he's got a version that like makes sense to him. It comes to us, and we're hypercritical of the sound much more so than Sean, right? And so we're like, yeah, it works, but like right at the end of the siren, we hear Annie say something, and so now we've got two Annies because like she's also speaking on this other track that you've cut in, and then the end of the siren has her speaking on top of it too. So we can't actually use the end of the siren because there's two Annies, and that's not making sense. So then we have to find a similar siren and build an ending to that moment that we then sort of like, cross out of one and into the other so that it has the button that makes it work and makes it believable and also fixes the problem of the dialogue overlap. And that's the kind of stuff where it's it's the other part of sound editing and sound design that is not the sort of like, oh, I've got a blank canvas, I have all this pristine material to work with in terms of great production dialogue or ADR or what have you, and I can throw anything at the wall. It's a bit more about like problem solving, right? So that you can retain as high a percentage as possible what actually happened on the day, because what happened on the day is the stuff that Sean is in love with, right? So it's just kind of wearing a slightly different hat. So that's just one aspect of what we do, is to just shine a light on that for a minute, is to say that, like, yes, we do all kinds of things where we start from scratch, we build unique sounds, and we go out into the field and we bring our surround sound microphones and we capture the environment, and we use those sounds because we have good clean recordings and we can use that to build out the world and make it feel believable. But then also at other times we have a director who's fallen in love with the moment, and the moment's great up until the last bit, and that bit just flat out won't work. And so we have to put our problem solving hats on and engineer a thing that makes you feel like it's seamless and believable, like it actually happened on the day, even though it very much did not, right? And make sure that the audience isn't taken out at the moment going like, hey, hang on, there's something weird about that. I don't know what exactly, but it's not quite right. Because we never want that to happen. That's all in a day's work.
And I'll say that, the human skill of creativity came about from having limited options. So, when you're presented with limited options and having to work within those confines, it's a lot of fun because you get to really get creative and say, how can we make this work? And those types of challenges are really fun as a sound designer, sound editorial, and mixer.
Oh yeah, 100%. Because then, what fun is it if you have all the tools in the world to do what you need to do? That's not really going to be fun, because then you can just, I don't, maybe might not even get anything done because you have too much choice to choose from, and then to work on things, rather than how can I use my skills to better the scene or hone in on what we want to do and what we want the audience to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've just got two more questions because I know we're slightly going over. For my penultimate question, there's not that much score. Most of the score that's used is kind of more soundtracks and songs from other artists. So there's a lot of sort of music supervision that goes into it. When a director goes down that route, how difficult is it for you guys, or is it easier for you guys to implement your sound design and break things in? Because when the needle drops, it sometimes the song overtakes everything, so it's just the music being played. Does that make your heart lives easier, or is it just something that you just go along with the director and just let them choose where they put the music in?
Easier. And I'll let John explain why. I'll tell you why I think it's easier, because one of the things I do a fair bit of mixing versus mixing and sound supervising, right? Like I do all of the above. I'd say probably half my films are where I supervise, edit, and mix, and the other half where I just come in to mix. And I've observed over the years that, you know, typically this kind of happens across all budget levels, but you get to a point in the mix where everybody's brought their stuff to the stage, and there maybe hasn't been the luxury of time, is often the case, and or communication for departments to listen to one another. So you get all this music that comes in that's glorious and beautiful and occupies every speaker and every frequency known to man. And then you get the sound as well that occupies every speaker and every frequency known to man. And there's this battle that then proceeds where the director and editor want to hear it all. And you're like, well, guys, it's not physically possible. So we have to start making choices about what we're going to sacrifice this for that. And so that can become really challenging when you've got, really great score and really important sound design, and you're trying to find and thread that needle, and the more dense the mix becomes, the more challenging that becomes. So if a film comes to us and there's not going to be any score, it's like, wow, we can really do anything. We're only responsible to ourselves at this point. We're not responsible for integrating the score, making sure that the score works as well. So that's why I say I think it makes the job easier.
Yeah, and also just it allows us to, all the environmental sounds that might be kind of blanket covered by score, all those sounds are sounds that are going to be heard. And so we get a lot more fun creating those environments and playing with all of those, playing with the tonality of different sounds. We know that there's going to be a light shine on it, on all of that. That's what we're hearing. So it makes it a lot more interesting and fun. I love films where, the environment is just guiding your emotions. And so to have that, especially in a Sean Baker movie where it's just an incredible film to start with, it does make it a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think it's very opening with Take That Greatest Day, which being British myself, it was quite funny sort of hearing it because didn't ever expect to hear Take That in an American film, and the sort of tone that it sets up, you kind of have that weird juxtaposition of like hopefulness in the song, and then they're in the strip club, or and it's just kind of
Yeah.
just it's funny to sort of hear and see, but then also once you think about it more, you kind of feel more that for some people, like this could be the greatest day of their lives.
Exactly. It couldn't be any other song. Now that you've seen it this way, it's like, no, there's no other song that would do what that does. Just as you highlighted in terms of how it makes you feel and what it's setting you up for. Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's funny as well. Like I'm sure at the time somebody probably mentioned, it's like, "Are you sure you want to put this song into the opening?" But then actually, yeah, I don't think you could think of anything else that would go there. Yeah, just amazing to think that I can't imagine any other song that could be put there in front of it. And then just to wrap up this episode with my final question, what was your favorite scene to work on?
It's definitely gonna say the end scene was a lot of fun. We spent a lot of time on that, the scene in the car. It was a lot of fun to orchestrate that, and it's just a lot of fine, subtle details that create that arc, and such an important scene in the film, and also a scene that a lot of people have connected with. So that one we worked closely with Sean, really building that out, and you know, yeah. So that was our funnest one, probably.
Yeah, I think I can think of a couple others, but I think that's the one that certainly is the scene that's most talked about for people that have watched the film. It's interesting because I talk to people who have very different views on that scene and what it means and their interpretation of it, which I think is kind of Sean's intent. He often does this at the end of his films and wants the audience to walk away and have something to talk about and think about and disagree with one another on in terms of what it's supposed to mean and feel, and the why of it all. Yeah, it was great to construct that scene. It's a scene that we spent a great deal of time on. It's a scene where we allow the sound design to do something that score might otherwise do, because there's some dynamics at play, and there's some orchestration in the sound of like those windshield wipers and so on that very much mirror Annie's emotional arc. And those sounds, those windshield wiper sounds, are actually sounds from production where we mined all of the various takes of that scene from the day, and found in between the words, we found those wiper squeaks. And based on the amount of snowfall that was hitting the windshield, they would sound different, right? So like when there's no snow, they were really brash. And as the snow would build up, they would change timbre towards the end. They basically became just kind of like a whisper. And so that was really interesting, something that we keyed into early on. And we're like, oh, that's cool. We could do something with that. And so we went in, we grabbed every usable bit, and then we stitched them together. So they go from big and brash and in your face and kind of grating. And over time, they sort of progress into a lullaby way. They're very soothing. And so, yeah, it's kind of a cool example of finding stuff from production, cutting it together, giving it a sense of lyricism so that it reflects what's happening on screen. And then all at the same time feeling like it's real, right? Because again, that's our goal. So for all of those reasons, I think it was for us, it was a really rewarding scene to put together, and and it just so happens to be arguably the most important scene of the film. So yeah, I think that's probably the one, if I had to single one out.
I still think that scene kind of haunts you a little bit as an audience member, but then also it's funny the sound of it because you're sort of so engrossed with what's happening in the performance, but it's also when you think about the sound, like even like the windscreen wipers of even though you use the ones that were captured on the day, I can imagine prior to that it would probably be quite it would have taken a bit of time if you had to go through like a certain library of windscreen wipers to know which ones to use, but then also if you were choosing it, it's like what's the pace of them, and because you don't want it to be too sort of too fast, or then also you don't want it to be too squeaky to then tear you away from what's going on. Um, but then also I think you mentioned it as well about the use of the Mercedes and making sure that if you were to use the library soundtrack, to use the correct sort of ones that might associate with that car.
All supplemented as well. The squeak was fully production, but the actual mechanical sounds of the wipers and all the elements of the car, there's supplementation, but we definitely use focus a lot heavily on sounds that are both in production as well as wild recordings that we got to be able to build things out. Yeah.
Yeah, and to your point, Robert, like you wouldn't find a windshield wiper squeak sound in a effects library that would have that degree of variation to it, such that it would be able to tell that story
Yeah.
telling, right? They just don't exist, right? So that was very much a lucky find, and it took some time to mine all of the recordings to find all the right bits and then get them organized and put them in order. But yeah, very very lucky that was again one of those sort of happy accidents that got picked up on the day that we were able to run with. And the Mercedes, John, isn't the Mercedes mostly the production capture in that scene, like the base layer of the engine? I think it is.
Yeah. Mostly, but
Yeah.
everything's supplemented. But yeah, the base layer of that is production, yeah.
Yeah, amazing though as well. Just like as you said, the gods always shine down on Sean Baker. Um, Andy, John, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Anora is out now on VOD. Go out, and hear Andy and John's work. Yeah, thank you again, guys.
Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you.
You guys take care and bye-bye.
Okay, cheers. Thanks. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.